So today I'm going to talk about something a lot different from all the other speakers. So I know this is a tech conference around entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of things I could talk about entrepreneurship. I feel like all the other speakers really cover that very well. Today what I'm talking about is education, which is very tied into what we're doing at our company. And the cool thing about education is that all of us has experienced it at one time or another in our lives. So we all have an idea of how we want to fix it, how we can improve it, and how we can make it better. There's a lot of talk about education, from the White House to the stage and everywhere in between. Everyone talks about it. But I'm here to really hone it down to one very simple message, which is the problem with education today is that it's no longer about learning. See, education is what someone tells you to do, and learning is what you do for yourself. Education forces square pegs into round holes. It's a one-size-fits-all solution that leads people down a very predetermined path around getting a degree. On the other hand, learning is completely different. Learning is very magical, see? Learning has no roadblocks, has no prescribed paths, no tests, no quizzes, no outdated majors, and no degrees. Learning is about staying curious, which is what the video that we played earlier, the main message in that. See, we're all born with curiosity because curiosity is the compass that leads us to our individual passions. So what I'd like to do today is share a couple of stories from my personal life and from others in our community that really embody this notion of staying curious, leading to your passions, and leading you down this different path that wasn't prescribed to you before. So my whole life, up until I was 18, was all around getting into college. So I did everything you were supposed to do. I studied hard. I stayed after school. I played in all the sports. I took the SATs. And I finally got into college. About 10 years ago, I went to the University of Virginia. It was a great school. One day I woke up and I felt like I kind of got duped. And the reason I felt like I got duped is because my entire life I was told, if you get into college, you'll have a successful life. You'll get a great job. You'll do all these cool things. When I got into college, I just started noticing that those things just didn't happen. And it really revolved around this one class that I took. So when I was at University of Virginia, I didn't get into business school, so the fallback thing was you majored in economics, which I was terrible at. But in order to get into business school, you had to take all these econ classes, so I just ended up majoring in it just because I wanted to graduate on time. So I took this one class on game theory, and the way I really operated in school was I actually never went to class. But when I did, I never really understood what was happening. There's these graphs, and this graph was here, and this other graph was there. And then it was all based on rational behavior, which we know in real life that never happens. So I took this class on game theory, which is basically a very simple concept, which is a theory of computation stated in terms of gains and losses among opposing players. Sounds really simple, but when you add calculus and all these other graphs, it got really confusing for me. So I never really went to class, and in order to graduate, I had to pass this class. So I did what every other college student does, is I crammed for like 72 to 96 hours. I memorized everything I could. I came in there, I literally didn't even know what I was doing. I just like, okay, the teacher showed that example, I memorized it, I'm just gonna regurgitate it on this exam, regurgitate it, ran out of the classroom, dropped the pen, I was like, thank God it's over. Still could not tell you today what game theory means at all. Does this sound like anyone's college experience ever? So at that moment, I was just kind of baffled that, my entire life I got told I had to go to college, and all I'm doing in college is drinking, eating, and memorizing things for exams that have nothing to do with real life. So from there, I decided to try a different path. So I was like, this analytical thing's not really working. So my little sister went to a school in Richmond called VCU. And at the time, they had this advertising school called the Brand Center. And for me, that was really eye-opening because I went to the school. So I had this traditional educational experience that didn't really like or didn't really find valuable. And I went to this other school that was still in a traditional setting, but I felt like it was one of the most valuable education experiences that I've ever had in my entire life. And the reason for that is because they taught me everything that I wanted to learn and wanted to apply in my real life. I learned about creativity, I learned how to work in groups, I learned how to present my ideas clearly, I learned how to solve problems, I learned how to question things, I learned all these other things and all these other skills I felt like were very applicable. And I would still say today, Skillshare would not exist without that educational experience I received at VCU. And I started really thinking about very simple questions like, why couldn't all education be like this? Why do I have to take an economics course or a class around something that I don't really want to learn? So after VCU, I did what every other college student does, and I just traveled around the world, just pondering these random questions. What am I going to do with my life? I think now they coined it like your quarter-life crisis. Like, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to live? What am I, I have no skills. I didn't want to work in advertising because I felt like I don't want to sell more things to more people. So I started traveling. I spent the summer in Thailand. I was like a beach bum. It's probably like very reminiscent of all 22, 23, 24-year-olds. And finally, on my last stop, I ended up working and getting a job at this advertising agency in London called Naked. And for me, it was like the most awesome thing you could possibly do. At 23 years old, you're like, oh my gosh, I get to work on Nike and Nokia and launch Nike basketball in China. This is like the most awesome job in the world. And I woke up one day and it said, there has to be something else that I could do that matters. And I felt like I learned all these things, and then that's when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. So this was about 2006. This is the first time that I felt like something happened so close to home that it actually connected with me on like a very personal level. So most times you'll see things in the news, you're like, oh, that's very sad, and then you'll move on. But for me, this was so eye-opening that this could happen in our own backyard. I felt like I really had to do something about it. So what I decided to do is I packed my bags from London and moved to New Orleans and created my own kind of like 1-year volunteer program. And I was fortunate enough to get a job at another advertising agency called Trumpet. And the really interesting thing about Trumpet is that they ended up firing all their clients that weren't Louisiana-based, which is what attracted me to them. And the first project I worked on was rebranding the entire city of New Orleans, because tourism was such a huge part of their economy. This is also where Antonio met Robbie, who was my old boss, and this is where I really learned about giving back to the community. I really found a lot of fulfillment in all the things I was doing. At the same time, this season came out on The Wire, which is all about education. And for me, I was in New Orleans, I was volunteering, I was working. I saw this entire season on education, and it kind of hit me that majority of the problems that are happening in our communities and our society are all rooted in education. And if we could solve the education problem in our world, then we could really solve all the other problems. So you're watching the show. The Wire is awesome. Any Wire fans? Yes. And my roommate at the time was the principal of a charter school. So I watched the show and I was like, holy shit, this is actually happening right now. And he would tell me these crazy statistics, like in New Orleans pre-Katrina, there was an 80% high school dropout rate. So 8 out of 10 kids in kindergarten would not even make it to their high school graduation for a lot of different reasons. And their goal, and this is NOLA 180, which is a charter school in New Orleans, was to turn that around to a 90% college graduation rate. So along this path, this journey, and I was staying very curious about all the different things and all the different opportunities before me, I kind of got really stuck to this one. I really saw firsthand a humongous educational problem in our country, and I started thinking about what are all the things that we could do to solve that. Obviously, you could build a charter school. Obviously, you could do a lot of other things, but at the time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do about it. I just knew it was a problem that I wanted to solve. And also at the same time, I drank, ate, partied, and partied a lot. So this is Mardi Gras 2010. So New Orleans is a fun city, so it wasn't all work and play like everyone thinks. But before I left, I volunteered at this nonprofit called Idea Village. And what was really interesting about Idea Village is that they had a mission to rebuild the city of New Orleans through entrepreneurship. So up until this point, I really never knew what it meant to be an entrepreneur, because I really never, that path, that idea of doing that never really crossed my mind. I always felt that I was entrepreneurial. So just like Eddie, I was hustling a bunch of random things on the side, but I never really channeled that into doing anything business-wise. So I was volunteering there. I met so many entrepreneurs and saw all the amazing things they were doing for the city of New Orleans. And that's kind of where it caught, I call it like the entrepreneurial bug. I was just thinking of ideas all the time. I was getting inspired by like just seeing them operate. And that's what got me to detour my path from New Orleans after a year. I moved to New York, which is where I started working at this company called Behance. So the journey through New York is really interesting. So that, on a side note, I always talk, when I do entrepreneurial talks, I always say, on this side in the corporate world, it's a very obvious ladder of what you should climb. If you work at a bank, you go work there for 2 years, you go back to grad school to get your MBA, then you come back, Eventually, you're a VP after X amount of years. And I feel like on the entrepreneurial side, there's a very similar ladder that you climb. And for me, it was all about working at other startups, learning as much as I could, percolating ideas, marinating ideas on the side, and hopefully climbing that ladder so eventually I could start my own company. And a great example of this that I always use in the Skillshare classes that I teach is Jack Dorsey. So Jack Dorsey climbed this ladder, continuously. Obviously, he started Twitter. How do you top Twitter? Obviously, he started Square with the other speaker that was here, and I think he'll be the CEO of Apple next. And you can see he's climbing that entrepreneurial ladder, and he'll do nothing. Every time he comes with the idea, it'll be nothing below that. So while I was at Behance, we did a lot of research on how to organize creative people. And then from there, I decided to jump over and work at another startup called Hot Potato. That ended up getting acquired by Facebook. And then I decided to take another vacation, and I went to Vegas for the summer. So when I was in Vegas, I decided I had my bucket list. So I was like, okay, I'm climbing this ladder. I really didn't know what I wanted to do next. So I decided to enter this tournament, get about half my friends to pay for half of it, and I would put up the other half, and I was going to donate 100% of it to charity. And the really cool thing about this is the poker community really embraced me just doing this. So in order to increase my odds of winning, I got all the best poker players in the world to coach me. So I had like Andy Duke and Phil Gordon and all these other poker players that are really well known in the poker circles. And they taught me everything that they possibly could in that short period of time in order so that I could maximize my chances of winning so I could donate all to charity like the one in New Orleans. So I remember I met Annie Duke for my first class. I was really excited. And this is one of the best poker players in the world, so I sit across from her. And the very first lesson she gives me was a lesson on game theory and decision making. And I was like, shit. So I'm freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh, there's graphs, there's calculus. I was like, what does this have to do with poker? But she kind of broke it down for me, and it really made a lot of sense. See, poker is a game of decision making under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And it's a sum-zero game, which is why my gains are exactly balanced by your losses. So in other words, I only win when you lose, and that's the only way you'll ever win in poker. So my success depends on other people making terrible, terrible decisions, which is where game theory comes into play. So I was like, okay, I get it. So, here's the secret for any of you guys that play poker. The only way, the secret to winning poker is that you make good decisions, that guy makes bad decisions, or you find the guy that makes a lot of bad decisions, you pick on him, and then you just take all of his money. That's usually how poker works. So I learned that, and I was like, okay, game theory makes a lot of sense. But a topic that I found insanely boring in college turned into one of the most fascinating topics of all time for me. I finally learned the concepts, and I made it applicable to what I was doing because it was something I was really passionate about learning at the time. So what ended up happening is, we ended up donating a little over 125 grand in charity, so all the other poker players ended up, pledging as well. We also lost a bet, so we had to wear lady tracksuits that ESPN covered, which is really funny. But the really interesting thing is, after I left Vegas, I spent some more time off really thinking about what I wanted to do next, which is when I came to the big realization, which is that education is very different from learning. And the reason I came up with that idea is because I felt like my experience at UVA was very centered around education. And this thing that happened in Vegas was really around learning. And I started thinking a lot about what could we do to encourage learning more. So when I flew back to New York, all of my friends obviously emailed me and they asked me, can you please teach me everything you learned that summer? So I did what anyone else would do for their friends. I went online, created an Eventbrite event, send that link out, and that's basically when Skillshare started. So Malcolm, who's now the co-founder, emailed me back. He's like, I can't believe this does not exist in the world, and I know we've been talking about education for a long time. This is the idea. So as we started thinking about what Skillshare can become, it would always revolve around one very simple mission, which is reuniting learning with education and making it accessible to every single person on this planet, where anyone can learn anything at any age at an affordable cost anywhere in the world. And we started thinking about how we could do that. We saw a massive opportunity to reinvent education and create new models of learning that didn't exist before. And this is the one question that we always ask internally on why we do what we do and how we can do what we're doing. And the question is really simple, which is if we could rebuild education from the ground up for the 21st century, what would it look like today? And the obvious thing is, everyone's been to school, everyone's been in a classroom, and this is usually the traditional notion of what you think about when you think about a class. And the very first thing we decided to do is reinvent what a classroom means. A couple months after we launched, one of my good friends, Jerry Chow, decided to teach a class on how to teach or how to talk to strangers. And the unique thing about this picture is the class was held on the L train between New York and Manhattan. So you had to meet in Union Square. She would give you a really quick 5 to 10 minute lecture or Skillshare lessons, and she immediately took you, gave you balloons, made you ride the L train from Union Square to Williamsburg and back for 30 minutes, and just go up to complete strangers and give them balloons and start talking to them. And I really love this example because it really broke down the idea of what a classroom is and what it means and who can teach and who is a student and what you're supposed to do. She got really creative with it, and these are the type of classes that we started to see on Skillshare. So we started thinking about what are all the things that we could do to really reinvent it. If you had to blow it up and start over, what would it look like? So one of the first things we said was everywhere could be a classroom. It doesn't have to be in a room with a blackboard, with a projector, with a bunch of people sitting in a room just listening. It could be interactive, it could be at a park, it could be online, it could be offline, it could be literally anywhere. The other thing we started talking a lot about was anyone and everyone should be a teacher. One of the biggest holes in the idea in the early days was that you had to go to school for 5 years to become a teacher, and even out of all the people that went to school for 5 years, there's still bad teachers, so teaching is really hard. We kind of shattered that notion and reinvented what it meant to be a teacher. So anyone could be a teacher, students could be teachers, that cycle could go on forever and ever. You don't have to be an expert. And we started seeing that through our community, and I'll give some more clear examples in a few minutes. The other idea is that anyone could be a student. And what we mean by that is one of the biggest problems in our country and our society is that the pinnacle of education today is getting into college. It's not learning. And when the pinnacle of education is getting to college, then people stop learning when they graduate from high school or college or graduate school, which is, I think, one of the most fundamental problems in our education system today. So much like Yale from Fuck Cancer spoke about earlier, where 90% of cancer can be prevented if you detect it early. I think there's a lot of problems with the educational system, and I think there are a lot of people solving it from all different angles, and we need everyone to solve it from all different angles. But the easiest way to solve the education problem in our country is to reunite it back with learning. As simple as that sounds, it's really not happening today. So what we mean by everyone can be a student is that you should not stop learning when you graduate from school. You should actually be a lifelong learner and learn everything that you would like to learn and make sure it's very accessible and very affordable so that you can have access to it. The other thing we talk a lot about is that it should be applicable skills. It should be things that you can take today and apply it almost immediately. Whether you want to do it for a new job, whether you have a new hobby, it's almost irrelevant. As long as you can take those things you're learning and apply them into the real world today. Then we started talking about all the things we don't want. Obviously, no exams, no memorizing, regurgitating things, less lecturing. So a lot of our teachers now are spending more of their time, very similar to the Salman Khan model, where they send out all the materials before class. When they get to class, they spend all their time interacting, working on projects, solving complex problems that have a million different solutions, and learning through that process versus sitting in a room. And teaching. What we're starting to see today is a lot of the students are flipping over to the other side and becoming teachers, which is really amazing to see. And lastly, we talk a lot about learning by doing, which goes to encompass everything. It's rather than memorizing equations for a test, learn by taking action, learn from your peers, learn by getting feedback, learn by making mistakes, learn by making things. And when you start thinking about this area of learning by doing, it starts replacing what a degree could look like, or what a resume could look like, or what accreditation or assessment could look like. Because your statement of accomplishment no longer needs to be a degree, a certificate, or stamp of approval. You can start showing the things that you make. In our company, when engineers apply, or designers apply, or pretty much anyone applies, we ask them to send us links of all the things they've made. And we feel that that speaks volumes over what they say they could do versus what they actually have done. So we believe learning and the proof of learning and mastering a skill is in proof in action. And the other thing we talk a lot about is learning by collaborating, working with other people, getting feedback, asking questions, obviously learning by failing. So a couple weeks ago, we hosted an event in New York called Penny. And one of my favorite quotes from that conference was from Tony Wagner, and he said that F should be the new A. When you really think about that, that's really fascinating because school and traditional education really encourages people to not fail. It's basically to get an A, where it's for the new world that is being created and for all the innovation that needs to happen, we have to encourage all the young students to continuously fail because through failure is how they will obviously progress. And obviously learn creativity. This is a very famous talk by Sir Ken Robinson that says that the traditional education system teaches kids to become less creative as they get older. And that is a humongous problem in our country as well. And when you start thinking about becoming a lifelong learner and learning whatever you want, being very curious, following your passions, it really opens up an entire gamut of all the possible things you would want to learn. And I think that's how the young students and young adults in our country can stay creative. It's through education. And lastly, we talk a lot about this, but it's learning with a community. And I think community is one of the most important things that's necessary for a proper education and learning experience to happen. So really quickly, I'd love to share a couple of stories of teachers and students from Skillshare so you guys can have a better understanding of what this looks like. So Avi is one of my favorite teachers on the platform. And the interesting thing about Avi, he started programming at the age of 11 because he was really curious about it. And the unique thing is he actually never went to school to become a teacher. In fact, he actually dropped out of college. But today, he teaches a Skillshare course on becoming a Ruby on Rails developer, which is a programming language for developers. And today, he makes around $13,425 from every course that he teaches. It's about $895. I think 15 students take it, and it's a 5-week intensive course. The really interesting thing about this is I think he's taught over 200 students so far, and a lot of them have gotten new jobs. Some of them have taught before. I think one of his students just presented at the New York Tech meetup on Tuesday with a new app that he launched. Another student we're integrating with his recruiting software that he created. It's really cool to see someone from the local community teaching other people a skill that they're automatically applying. And one of those students is Eric. So Eric was a sophomore at Baruch College, which is a college in New York. And like Avi, he's really curious to learn about programming. So, at a young age, he kind of dabbled in a bunch of things. But, he went to college, and the funny thing about his university is that he was not allowed to take any programming classes until his junior and senior year. So in his freshman and sophomore year, he had to take all his requirements and take English classes and psychology classes. And for him, he just really didn't see the point of it. So on the side, he decided to enroll in Avi's course and learn obviously how to program. He quickly became one of Avi's top students. Avi ended up hiring him to be an intern, and Avi ended up hiring him to be full-time. And then not too long after that, Eric dropped out of college as well. But the cool thing about Eric is that he convinced his parents to take his tuition and apply to a 2-year work-study program where Avi is one of his mentors today. There are a lot of stories like this within the community. Another one is about Suyash, who's over the past year has taken about 70 classes around entrepreneurship, design, product development. And basically he created his own curriculum to become an entrepreneur one day. And he did it all for $2,200, which is really fascinating if you really compare that to the cost of a traditional education. I think one day Suyash will obviously start his own company, become very successful, and hopefully he could teach and pay it forward to all the other students in New York and hopefully around the world. So it goes back to, in closing, it goes back to that one question. If you had to rebuild education for the 21st century, what would it look like? And in closing, I'd love to share just one last story. This was at South by Southwest a couple of months ago. And there was a workshop by Little Bits. So Little Bits is kind of like a 21st century version of Lego. But rather than making houses or boats, you kind of make like these cool electronic gadgets. So I was there, and I was with Malcolm, and we started making all these things. So we decided, to make this like electronic gadget that made a bell ring. So we were those guys that kept buzzing and the bell kept ringing. And this girl just kind of walked up to us, and she sat next to me, and she just asked me, how'd you guys do that? And it's the girl with the sunglasses. You know, I quickly showed her, you know, how we did it. And, you know, I grabbed the pressure sensor and I said, you know, that connects to this vibration motor. If you connect these other pieces and you put this other piece into the bell, it'll start jingling. You know, so she started putting together, you know, she put, you know, the pressure sensor with the vibration motor, and, you know, she kept pressing it and it wouldn't work, so she screwed up, you know, she screwed up a couple times. And then, you know, she finally figured it out and she made the bell ring. Which I thought was like, oh wow, that's pretty awesome, because I have absolutely no idea how to do this, and I just taught someone how to do it. And then not too long after that, her parents came over and she was showing them, and then this little boy walked up to her and he asked her the same question. You know, he asked her, how did you make that bell, you know, jingle? And she did the same thing. She taught him the same thing that I taught her. She was like, you know, if you take this pressure sensor, you hook it up to the vibration motor, put in the bell, and it'll start ringing. Same thing happened to him. You know, he was trying to put pieces together. It didn't work too well. And finally, the bell started ringing, and his parents came over. And for me, that was a pretty awesome moment. Out of all the things that happened in the past year, I would say that was probably one of my favorite moments. And the reason is because it really embodied all those things we talk about when we talk about how do we rebuild education. And what this also did is open my eyes to what you could do for our kids in the future, and what you could do and how you can create education for them. And this example really embodied, you know, learning by failing, learning by collaborating, learning by asking questions, learning by doing, learning by making things, and finally learning by teaching someone else. A girl that was 6 or 7 years old, you know, really went through that entire process in a span of 30 minutes. So in closing, I believe that the world's most abundant resource are excess knowledge and skills. It just needs to be shared and made accessible to everyone on this planet. Learning and teaching is essential to keep our world spinning, and I believe that all of our progress is dependent on it. This room is full of our most precious resource, which is knowledge and skills. So I would just encourage everyone here to use all the skills you have to make a difference in this world, especially in education. Never stop learning, and remember that education is what someone tells you to do, and learning is what you do for yourself. So thank you.
First question. There's a meme going around. Mike, I'm sure. First, did you guys notice that Mike was wearing the same shirt in that photo up there?
Yeah, this is different.
Oh, okay, it's different. That's awesome. He's like, no, dude. I'm sure a lot of great questions are going to come about education, the work that you're doing. I'm really curious in terms of your poker background and being a professional poker player. What has that brought to you from a business perspective?
What's the question?
How being an awesome poker player maybe helps make you a great business.
I actually talked about this yesterday. So if you read Tony Hsieh's book on delivering happiness, I think he kind of followed that same path. So I love games. I've played games forever. Like internally at Skillshare, we have game night all the time. And poker is, I think, one of the most complex games you could ever play. As an entrepreneur, people get weirded out because I don't really get affected by the ups and downs. Because in poker, you know, when I was younger, I made so many mistakes. You know, losing tons of money, making tons of money, going to the club, blowing all of it at Vegas. And then pretty soon you start learning how to they call it bankroll management. You start learning how to control your swings. You start learning how to make decisions that are the best possible decisions, and you remove emotion out of it. So you're not making emotional decisions and all these other things that really teach you a lot. And I think entrepreneurship is almost identical. If you think about the ups and downs, you know, not getting too emotional about decisions you're making, and you know, startups specifically in businesses and growing them, you're making probably millions of decisions in the lifetime of that company, and it's the companies that make the best decisions throughout those million are the ones that succeed. So, you know, just always remembering that. So a lot of lessons from poker.
Hey Michael, great talk. I'm a huge fan of how technology is changing the way education is becoming more accessible to everyone. And Skillshare, I've done a whole bunch of courses myself. I love what you're doing. It seems like you guys made a real clear decision to only focus on offline education and using technology to bring people together offline. But there's also this huge movement in technology and education now where a lot of it's moving to online and becoming more accessible to people in that way. So I would love to just hear your thoughts on the whole online education movement and why you guys made the decision to keep it offline Yeah.
Yeah, so we get that question asked a lot, and my quick answer is we're definitely going to move online eventually. There's just no way we could achieve the things we want to achieve without doing that. And I would say the reason we started offline to start with is because we believe that community is one of the most important things in order for someone to have a great learning experience. So what we decided to do to begin with is start with the offline community so we could really understand that and figure out how you move that over to online. I think what you see a lot today is I think people are innovating on top of a model that's already broken. So if you think the traditional model is broken, lecturing and videos, what most of the companies are doing right now, they're just moving that online. So if a student was not going to learn in the classroom, they're not going to sit around and watch a 4-hour lecture and learn from that and take a bunch of quizzes. Our non-PC way of approaching that is just letting everyone else do it and seeing what works and what doesn't. And then hopefully moving into that space eventually.
Thanks. We'll take one last question.
So I'm going to have to include a little bit of personal background in this, but so right now I'm actually attending a community college, and I'm actually attending completely on student loans. I can't actually go out and do anything. I can't go out and really go into an internship or anything like that because I'm not skilled enough in some senses. But quite frankly, I'm surviving on student loans. So I just got out of high school about a year ago, and I'm just kind of curious, how do we bridge that gap between high school and college and career without having to have that intermediate step where, I'm literally living on student loans. I had to get here on via contest that Kauffman Foundation had.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question. It was echoing.
How do we bridge the gap between, for instance, high school and career, especially when situations where, I can't go back home and, live with my parents and things like that?
How do you bridge the gap between high school, I guess, and career, and I guess stay inspired when you can't go home anymore? I guess more of an inspirational, motivational kind of question.
Yeah, I feel like it's a career advice question versus. I think what I'm starting to see is a lot of companies not even asking for resumes anymore. And the reason they're not is because they're asking for you to show things that you've made. So if you're in high school or college or grad school, I encourage you to just make a lot of things, whatever that is. So the example that Scott Belsky at Behance gives a lot is, you can really know if someone's very ambitious or proactive or all those other traits in a startup by just asking them what they've done. So for example, if you were a hardcore rower and you started a rowing club in college and the rowing club became one of the best rowing clubs in the country and et cetera, that speaks more volumes about your character and the way you work and how you approach problems than anything else you can possibly say. And I think you'll start seeing a lot more companies looking for certain things like that as they start interviewing. And to be honest, I don't, when people apply at Skillshare, we don't even ask for resumes or where they went to school. I mean, all of our hiring is based all around the principle of what they've done, which I think is kind of like the new degree and the new resume. So I don't think all the companies will adopt that, but some should. So, thanks.